Welcome back. You're watching Inside Story, and we're looking at Nigeria, which has sworn in a new president, Umar Ya'Aruda. He's vowing to end the crisis in the Niger Delta to battle corruption. But he's made it clear that he wants to continue and build on the legacy of his predecessor, Olusegun Obasanjo. Well, that 70-year-old former military leader took power in 1999, and during his 8 years, he's been credited with achieving limited economic reforms. He's paid off Nigeria's foreign debt of $32 billion under a deal with the Paris Club of Creditors. He's also signed new economic partnerships with China that have reduced the country's dependence on the West. He was active with his foreign policy, setting up the African Leadership Forum in 1988 to provide advice to other African countries, and he's also sent Nigeria peacekeepers to several hotspots as part of the African Union mission and hosted talks to end the Darfur crisis. He spent much of his time as president on foreign trips and made a farewell tour of Sierra Leone and Liberia. Still with us, we have Vincent Magombe, Director of Africa Inform International, and Rolake Akinola, a West African analyst with the Control Risks Group. Let me just run through, if I may, the list I made beforehand of the problems as outlined by a number of people commentating on it. Corruption, the power sector, education, militancy, living in the former president's shadow, and there were many more. Let's go first of all to the power sector, Rolake, if I may. He's talking about declaring a state of national emergency because the power supplies in the country are so terrible. What is the situation there?
I mean, one of the main stumbling blocks to, I think, Nigeria's economic growth is the fact that power shortages have been undermining the operating environment, both for domestic and foreign business. I mean, one of Obasanjo's main drives was to try and encourage the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises, but if there are 24-hour power shortages all across the board, that's quite difficult. One of the problems has also been militancy in the Niger Delta, which last year affected the key source of energy for the country. Again, many private sector investors are very reluctant to venture into the Niger Delta to look at, say, independent power projects. So obviously this is verging on the level of a national emergency. Whether that will require a short-term solution is another thing entirely. I think there are many obstacles that work against reform in the sector, not least the unions who want a really good deal for themselves out of the privatization process. And also the years of corruption and mismanagement under military rule, I think, continues to haunt the power sector, including the Power Holding Company of Nigeria now, whose privatization has been delayed several times. So exactly, power is a key problem for the country, and one which can actually affect
you can't grow an economy
growth
if you don't have power supplies. Vincent Magombe, why is this such a big problem? Why is it happening? Pipelines being cut? Is it because of the militancy? Is it because of corruption? What's the reason?
I think the militancy and say things like that are just symptoms of the real root causes, the real big problem. And the problem of Nigeria has always been a problem to do with bad governance. And bad governance means then you allow corruption, but at the same time, I think this is where the crunch is. You then don't have right priorities that you address. So in other words, you know, there is a lot of money that can come into Nigeria, the oil billions that come in. I don't see Nigeria being a very poor country that can't address issues of power and so on. But the leaders have had no insight into what is the first priority. So I think that, you know, anybody who I think would not envy being in the seat or the footsteps of Ya'Aruda. But if he wants to do something, then first and foremost, he must try to prioritize things. You know, for example, try to make sure he immediately resolves the issue of the Niger Delta, making sure that those people do not cut supplies, they don't interfere with oil things and so on. But secondly, then you divert most of that money away from the pockets of the rich people and the corrupt people into the projects, power, making sure that the gap between the poor and rich decreases.
And one of the reasons, or one of the ways that you do that in the long term is by educating your people that there are ways that you do these things. And education has been suffering so terribly at the moment. A former lecturer, the new president, is that something you think he might invest in?
I think in a way it's a bit laughable to say about Nigerians that they perhaps don't have education. Nigeria has a biggest number of universities that you can count. It has
may
very
well
many
do, but
educated people and so on.
Not one of them features in the world's top 500.
No, that is true. Of course, we can't forget that there is a very big problem in terms of educating people within the countryside, and people are very uneducated as a population. But these are simple things. What they need to do is to really get this money from oil and invest it properly and in a systemic way into education, into health and other things. Now, corruption just steals and drains away most of these the money. And I think that the problem of corruption is so bad that many Nigerians, friends of mine that I talk to, just accept that it's part and parcel of the social fabric. You know, you can't do anything without paying money to someone. And I think that has got to change. But it has got to change with a leader being very brave, very courageous.
For the new president, we talk about the fact that his predecessors from the Christian South, that he is from the Muslim North. What are the pitfalls for him?
I think that the new president, the real pitfalls are that if he starts listening to General Obasanjo remains as the chair of the party, ruling party. If Ya'Aruda could try to be more independent and do what he did in his Katsina state and try to run a very efficient economy, and if he is to be very, very brave, in other words, risking his neck by these army men and also the corrupt people, and hit very, very harshly at corruption, meaning be ready to antagonize even those people on the side of Obasanjo that have not been tackled up to now.
And we're lucky,
things like that. But at the same time, I think be very, very brave enough to go down on the knees and ask the people of the Niger Delta,
please, at this point, Vincent Magombe, and ask her, in terms of the country's future, is there a danger that there could be civil strife? Has he got to be very careful to avoid that?
I think there has always been a sort of underlying danger of civil strife in Nigeria. We've witnessed pockets of isolated unrest over key issues. Ya'Aruda's biggest challenge will be attracting consensus across the board. And I do agree with Vincent on the fact that he needs to distance himself from Obasanjo, and this, particularly in relation to the Niger Delta. Obasanjo's government lacked a great deal of credibility amongst the Niger Delta hardliners. I think there will be groups in the Niger Delta who would be willing to sit down and listen to what the new president has to offer. However, one of the problems with the system is a lack of accountability, and leadership has been a problem. So whilst you can pump more money into education, you can pump more money into infrastructure, you need to ensure that the leaders are the right ones who will attract credibility.
Do it in 100 days, come up with some kind of plan, can he?
Honestly, I think that might be underestimating on Ya'Aruda's part the enormity of the task at hand. I think one of the key distractions for Ya'Aruda's administration in this first few months is a sort of positioning and jostling for position within government. We've already seen various groups lobbying to have their representatives in the cabinet, and I think Ya'Arudua needs to ensure that he doesn't get entrenched and immersed in this cycle of political patronage, which is really a real stumbling block in Nigeria's political system. Sort of reforming the entire structure of the state is necessary. So we're talking about the key institutions. Many institutions are still highly weak.
As well.
A very big challenge,
okay.
Certainly.
Rolake Akinola, thank you very much. Vincent Magombe, thank you too for your time, and thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Your comments and suggestions are very welcome. Inside Story at aljazeera.net from all of us here. Bye for now.